Welcome to Spooky History. In today's episode we're finding out about the book that caused one of the greatest acts of genocide in British history, Daemonologie. Daemonologie, the book that went on to cause the death of hundreds, the story of witches brought low by torture and forced to confess their evil, the proof of magic's connection to the dark powers of Satan. The once and future King James Stuart was born on June 19, 1566 at Edinburgh from the union of Mary Queen of Scots with her second husband Henry Stuart Lord Darnley. When his mother was forced to abdicate her throne by Queen Elizabeth, James was proclaimed King of Scotland and James VI on July 24, 1567. For the first 12 years of his life, he was kept for his own security in Stirling Castle, safe from the bickering Scottish factions. Physically, he was weak and sickly, playing a significant part in his tendency in later life to achieve his purposes by manipulation and deceit rather than the use of direct power. For the first 6 or 7 years of his life, he was unable to stand up or walk without aid. Throughout his life, he preferred to walk leaning on the shoulder of an attendant. His weakness of body was in part compensated by keenness of mind. James was often referred to as cowardly. When in 1587 his mother was executed by order of Elizabeth, he made little effort to prevent it. His personal appearance and manners were not attractive. He had a tendency to bluster and make promises he had no intention of ever fulfilling. He talked too much in a very thick Scottish accent and was pedantic and put on airs of scholarship that he did not deserve. In dress he was slovenly and unclean. His physical caresses and frequent gifts to male favourites in his court gave rise to gossip that he was homosexual. All these tendencies were strongly despised by the English people when he ascended to the throne of England in 1603 at the death of Elizabeth. But they swallowed their distaste and welcomed him in a practical spirit as the only alternative to bitter civil war. So how did an unpopular king, often seen as cowardly, slovenly, and something of a blowhard, end up penning one of the most famous works on witchcraft and devil worship of the age? It all starts with some news from Scotland. A pamphlet titled News from Scotland recounted a rather sordid affair. The deputy bailiff to the Kingdom of Scotland, David Seaton, had a servant named Gilly Duncan, who, within a short period of time, was found to have miraculously helped people troubled or grieved with sickness or infirmity. How awful! David Seaton would examine her as a witch and obtain a confession, which implicated many others across the region and became known as the North Berwick Witch Trials. It was this incident that would lead to the writing of Daemonologie. So what exactly is the book about? Daemonologie endorses the practice of witch hunting in a Christian society. James begins the book with, "The fearful abounding at this time in this country of these detestable slaves of the devil, the witches or enchanters, hath moved me, beloved reader, to dispatch in post this following treatise of mine, to resolve the doubting, both that such assaults of Satan are most certainly practised, and that the instrument thereof merits most severely to be punished." The main sources of the book were those of the statements of confessed witches, judicial case history, and of course, the Bible. He also collected myriad writings on magical studies to expand his knowledge of the relationships between spirits of the infernal and men. James tried to prove that the dark arts have always been and still do exist. He also attempts to justify witch trials and the punishments practice of the dark arts deserve. He also argues what kinds of things are possible in the performance of these arts, and the causes of the devil's powers, using philosophical reasoning. James wanted to prove the existence of witchcraft to other Christians through biblical teachings. As such, Daemonologie is split into 3 books, each based on the arguments the philosophers discuss, with citations of biblical scripture throughout. Daemonologie is written almost as a 2-person play, with 2 characters, Philomathes and Epistemon. The first book serves as an introduction covering the division of the magical arts with a comparison between necromancy and witchcraft, the use of charms, circles and conjurations, astrology, the devil's contracts with man, comparisons between the miracles of God and the devil, with the second book, which is based on the description of sorcery and witchcraft, specifically covering the difference between biblical proof and imagination or myth, a description of sorcery and its comparison with witchcraft, the path of a sorcerer's apprenticeship, curses and the role of Satan, the appearance of devils, the times and forms in which they may appear, the actions of witches, methods of transportation, and the illusions of Satan. The third book forms the conclusion of the dialogue. The work even touches upon werewolves and vampires. James states that demons are under the direct supervision of God and are unable to act without God's permission, and how God uses demonic forces as a rod of correction for when men stray from his will. Demons may also be commissioned by witches or magicians to conduct acts of evil against others. He quotes previous authors who state that each devil has the ability to appear in diverse shapes or forms for varying purposes. Ultimately, the works of demons, despite their attempts to do otherwise, will end in the further glorification of God. James provides a description of all the kinds of spirits and spectres that trouble men and women. His classification of demons is not based on separate demonic entities with their names, ranks, or titles. Instead, demonic entities are categorized according to the methods that they use to inflict mischief or torment on a living individual or a deceased corpse. With all of that said about the contents, is Daemonologie any good? Not really. It's not a particularly amazing read, and the format of a conversation does not really do it any favours. However, it wasn't the book that was the problem. It was the cultural significance it would have. After assuming the English throne in 1603, James ordered a new edition of Daemonologie be published in London so he could extend his crusade against witchcraft down south. A year after his coronation, James succeeded in getting the 1563 Witchcraft Statute abolished and a new statute erected in its place, with far harsher and broader punishment for suspected witches and practitioners of the dark arts. James wanted the practice of all forms of magic punished severely, regardless of whether it caused harm, because he held all such practice to be trafficking with the devil. This was a notable break from the previous laws that punished the use of magic only if it was used for malicious acts. The harder line taken in Daemonologie assisted in the creation of further witchcraft reforms, inspiring Richard Bernard's A Guide to Grand Jury Men. This work advised trials to take a stronger investigative approach to acquiring evidence and obtaining witnesses during witchcraft trials. There was also an influence on witchfinder Matthew Hopkins, who between 1644 and 1646 tried and executed an estimated 300 witches. In the year of his death in 1647, he published The Discovery of Witches, which directly refers to Daemonologie as a source. The Book of Daemonologie also had an influence on the Salem witch trials. To say that Daemonologie's influence was damaging would be a gross understatement. More than most books deemed evil, most books banned to protect the population, this book has directly caused torture, deaths, and justified the subjugation of those deemed different. But rather than end on such a sour note, remember this. It has been noted that the themes taken from Daemonologie and King James's involvement in the North Berwick witch trials may have contributed to the Scottish play, or Macbeth, to us common folk. Evidence of this exists in the three witches' use of ritual magic and direct quotes that mimic the testimony given from the witch trials described in the news from Scotland. Macbeth came into public view a few years after the Daemonologie was published and shares many of the same themes and settings. So at least it gave us a play about witchcraft and murder. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Spooky History. You can find us on most social media at Spooky Hist Show, and you can donate to us at paypal.com/noisyghostend. Hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos, and thanks for watching, and please, do have nightmares. Goodbye. From the union of Mary Queen of Scots with her second husband, Henry Stuart Lard? Go back. How did an unpopular king, often seen as cowardly, Go back.